Hello, everyone, and thank you for turning up to watch this conversation with the incredible Michelle Dowker. Wherever you're watching this, just to let you know that while this is coming to you seemingly live, Michelle and I have recorded this at a time that's suitable for us. She's in Canada, I'm in Melbourne. So we've done this prior to now, even though you're watching it live. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. So please, if you have any questions, for Michelle, while you're watching this, please put them in the comments and we'll do our best to come back and watch and answer when we can. So thank you for watching, and thank you to Michelle for being a part of Meat Week.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Tracy.
It's my pleasure. So you're very close to me because we've worked together intimately to help with my healing with Hashimoto. So I will be eternally grateful to the work that I've done with you. And, for everybody watching, they're going to gain so much knowledge from you today. But for people who don't know you, do you want to just give a little bit of an introduction to what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Michelle Dowker. I'm a naturopathic doctor turned emotional transformation facilitator. It's quite the word,
Love
isn't it?
it.
And I guess my journey, I myself have endometriosis and an autoimmune condition. And it was through my own journey for many, many years, my symptoms were very well managed with diet until I went through a very major stress in my life. And I ended up with a flare that I became so badly that I was bedbound for several months. And I had tried everything that I knew of as a naturopathic doctor, right? The AIP diet, the autoimmune paleo diet, all kinds of supplements and all kinds of things, and they weren't working. And it wasn't until I discovered the carnivore diet that I got myself back on my feet again. And it really opened my eyes to a whole other way that I hadn't learned in naturopathic college. And it really helped a lot, but it only got me so far. And so it was me discovering that healing stress and the underlying emotions is what got me the rest of the way, because it was the stress that triggered the autoimmune flare in the first place. And so that's what has taken me on this path now to being an emotional transformation facilitator. And I work with women who have tried all the diets up to autoimmune protocol, keto, carnivore, and it's gotten them so far, but they realize that there's still something missing. And they've come to realize that unhealed stress, unhealed emotions, potentially unhealed trauma are still lurking underneath the surface. And that's their missing piece of the puzzle left to heal and transform so they can finally get the results. And I find that they're results that are far beyond what we can get through just diet and supplements alone. So that's where I'm at now.
Amazing. I love the work that you do. So can we start by talking about what would be the benefits of a carnivore diet for someone who has an autoimmune condition? What are the benefits, but how would it work? How does that potentially help with healing?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I don't know the hard science. There's not a whole lot out there in terms of studies that are really examining this. It's really quite new. But my understanding, especially my understanding of autoimmunity, is the immune system is highly reactive with autoimmunity and chronic diseases of immune dysfunction, meaning that the immune system is reacting and producing inflammatory cytokines, which are the triggers for a lot of the symptoms that we get. And so a lot of plant materials and plants, a lot of them contain what are called anti-nutrients. And so we have things like oxalates and phytates and lectins, and there's many others. And my theory is that for those of us who do have a dysfunctional immune system that's on high alert, especially when our digestive system also has an immune system called the enteric immune system. And so the intestines have what's called intestinal barrier function. And so if that's activated, we'll be reacting to things that we don't necessarily normally react to when we are in a balanced state. And so what happens is, especially when our immune system is in this activated state, we have a higher tendency to react to these anti-nutrients, whereas somebody who is in a more of a homeostatic state might not necessarily have these same reactions. And these anti-nutrients, they're there as a protective mechanism for the plant, right? So say, for example, they're there to protect the plant from being eaten from insects, right? And especially for plants that are not designed, there are certain plants that are designed for reproduction by eating. So fruits, for example, they're designed for an animal to come and eat it and then deposit the seeds elsewhere. And that's how that plant reproduces. They're not as likely to have the same level as anti-nutrients as other plants that are actually not really designed for consumption. So say, for example, grains are designed to be propagated through wind, right? And then other ones like legumes, they're actually just supposed to drop. They're just supposed to fall off the plant, and the beans are supposed to propagate right where they are. And so they don't want to be eaten. That's the DNA of the plant. And so, say, for example, there are studies that show that lectins, which are found in a lot of grains, they can signal what's called a danger signal in our immune system, or it can signal a danger signal to our immune system, right? Because it's kind of a danger signal for the plant, right? To protect it and kill off bacteria or protect it against mold or fungi and those types of things. And so, a human, if we eat these anti-nutrients, they're in such small quantities that if your immune system is maybe well balanced, then you might not have a problem with them. But then we come to the situation of autoimmunity, and it can become a problem. And so taking all of them out, because animal products don't contain anti-nutrients, right? Meat doesn't contain anti-nutrients. So if you take all of these potentially aggravating substances that can be triggering to our immune system out, it can give the immune system a chance to calm down and rest because it's not being exposed to all of these things.
Yeah. Complete opposite to what most people think. Like when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I went to a doctor here, and of course it was just straight away, well, increase your veggie intake, eat the rainbow. And I can understand if you are going from a standard Australian diet, eating a huge amount of grains and processed foods, you could definitely get some benefit from doing that. But I knew straight away that wasn't going to be where I was, because I've been low carb keto for seven years.
Yeah.
But it's been a fascinating journey to see that. So I did go carnivore, and I think I was pretty strict for 7 months. And now I can eat again some of the foods that definitely were reacting in my body, because as you've said, what I did was with you is I addressed those underlying puzzle pieces, because I had no idea really that like anything, the universe puts things in front of you that you need to learn more about. And even as a health coach, I didn't really understand autoimmune, and I certainly didn't understand the importance of healing from the inside. And it makes so much sense with what you said there. Your journey, how has that looked for you? So you said you found or discovered the carnivore diet. It was pretty much by accident, wasn't it?
It was actually. It was, I had to have a colonoscopy. And part of the prep of this colonoscopy with this particular doctor is he wanted me to go on a low residue diet for 3 days prior to the colonoscopy prep day. And so what that entailed, low residue meaning little to no fiber. So that low residue diet was basically meat and white bread, but I haven't touched gluten in years. So I said, well, I guess I'm just going to be eating meat for 3 days. And I thought it was strange at the time, right? I had never considered anything like that, but I felt better. Right? I had been on the
Amazing.
autoimmune protocol where it's basically meat, fish, and tons of vegetables. And I just kept feeling worse and worse and worse. And then I went 3 days with just meat, and it was like this weight lifted off my shoulders, like this cloud, like dark cloud passed. And I was like, wow, what's going on here? And then I did the colonoscopy and I went back to the AIP diet and I started feeling bad again. Right. And it was about 4 months of me like digging into this, going, could this be a thing? This sounds so weird. Could that be a thing? And I actually found Sean Baker. He was just starting his movement online. Right. And so he actually urged the community to try a 30-day carnivore diet for the month of January. So I'm like, well, what do I have to lose? And within 3 days, again, it was like that dark cloud lifted, and the brain fog went away and the joint pain resolved and the dizziness resolved. And I was able to get up in the morning and have a full day without having to take breaks and rest. It was huge. And my husband was just like, wow, like he noticed the difference and he was shocked.
So when in your journey did you realize that there was more to it than diet?
Yeah, so I was several months very strict carnivore, and I started to try to reintroduce foods again, and kept getting reactions to everything, and it would last for days. And I realized like I can't reintroduce anything. At that point, I thought, well, I guess I'm going to have to stay carnivore for the rest of my life. But I felt so much better than I did, but it wasn't like I was like, wow, I'm feeling amazing, right? And especially when I was feeling stressed, I was still getting flare-ups. And I started to do some reflecting, and also I was digging and doing my own research during this time as well. I was starting to learn more and more about autoimmunity and endometriosis, and actually learned that the two are quite connected through this immune dysfunction. And started to learn that stress is a huge trigger. So we can have the genes for an autoimmune condition, but we might not necessarily actually have symptoms of it unless there is a trigger. And some triggers can be things like infection, toxin exposure, inflammatory diet. But many studies have shown, especially with adult onset symptoms, that over 80% of those with adult onset symptoms could recount a significant stress in their life just before the symptoms started. Right? And so that I had to kind of like, yeah, I think the stress is an issue. Right? I had to get real with myself. And I had to also, I knew that it wasn't just going to be stress management techniques that were going to cut it.
Yeah. It's got to be so deeper than that, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I hired my own coaches, because you can't, when you're lost in the forest amongst the trees, it's really hard to see your way out.
Yeah. It's so true.
Right. And so I got my own help to kind of start leading me through this process. And I mean, I still have coaches. I have multiple coaches actually to this day that I see to help me progress, because it is a lifelong process of growth and discovery and healing. And really, it becomes, the more and more that you do this work, it's almost like it becomes magical, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. It's been, I've seen the magic. It's been, the best journey, for want of a better word, that I've ever been on in my life. I'm so grateful that I did have this diagnosis, because it's uncovered so much about the magic that's within us all and the possibilities. And I know that I'll keep looking this way for the rest of my life, and, sharing what I see, and, 100% it has helped me, and it's obviously helped you. But can you
Mhm.
explain a little bit more about the potential? So what happens when we take stress in our body that can affect our immune system?
Yes, absolutely. So, stress, I mean, it can be emotional stress or physical stress.
Mm.
But especially when we're talking about emotional stress, we can have chronic long term stress and we can have acute stress. Now, this all impacts our nervous system. And our nervous system can actually deal with short term bouts of stress quite easily. It's designed for that. Actually, little
Mm.
bits of stress here and there actually can motivate us. It's good for us.
Mm.
The problem is that when we have underlying chronic stress, time after time after time, then when we encounter an acute bigger stress, it's almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's just too much for our nervous system. So what's happening is with stress, it affects our hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, which is or HPA axis. It's just a
The
big name.
HPA axis, that's better. Yeah.
Right, it's a big name. And so it affects our brain. It affects like the pituitary and the hypothalamus in our brain, and it affects the release of cortisol from our adrenal glands. And all of this, our nervous system communicates with our immune system. There's a lot of crosstalk there, especially through things that are called inflammatory cytokines. And so that's how the nervous system can impact immune system function, right? And then, of course, the nervous system being affected by stress, the nervous system through the vagus nerve can
Yeah.
also impact digestion and will also impact that intestinal barrier function. It also impacts all the rest of our hormones, our neurotransmitters. Um, it impacts everything. The nervous system, I call it the bridge between our emotional terrain and our physical health, right? Because it's the bridge that sort of how the nervous system is impacted will affect all of our physiological systems. And so
Mm.
that's why it's so important to make sure that our nervous system is well regulated, that we have what's called nervous system flexibility. So just as it's important to have metabolic flexibility, it's important to also have nervous system flexibility and to have what's called good vagal tone. So our vagus nerve it's that we're working it, that it can kind of come in and out of stress response and relaxation response easily. So that's what the nervous system flexibility is all about. And when we have a lot of internal emotional pressure, like that's a huge one, especially for people with autoimmunity. I see a lot of themes in terms of people with autoimmunity, in terms of some of the internal dialogue that's going on in their minds, perfectionism, pressure on ourselves to perform, putting other people before ourselves, right? So that we're not necessarily putting our needs first, we're neglecting our needs, right? We can end up
Mm.
feeling resentful, we can end up feeling overworked, burnt out, right? Pushing ourselves beyond our limits. And all of this puts pressure on our nervous system. And over time, this is what's going to cause everything that I've mentioned, right? And especially it can trigger this immune dysfunction, which can trigger the development of autoimmunity, endometriosis, allergies, asthma, chronic fatigue, and fibromyalgia.
Wow,
It's
that's a
huge,
lot.
right?
Yeah, it is. It's huge.
Yeah. And so that's why it's kind of it is important to address that as part of the ensemble of things that you do. And I mean, diet is also important. It's not to say that diet isn't important, because what you take in is biochemical information for all of the biochemical reactions that go on in your body, right? So, it's not about, okay, well, if I heal my emotions, then I can just eat a bunch of crap.
Yes, no, that's right. It's
Right?
good.
It doesn't
Glad
work
you
that way.
said that. That definitely doesn't work that way. And that's interesting because like what I was talking about when I can now tolerate things. I'm talking about I can tolerate the whole egg now, because egg whites I realized were actually an issue for me.
Mm.
But now I can have, and I don't eat eggs
Yay.
every day, but 3 or 4 times a week I can, and I have no reaction. My reactions were heat and tiredness, extreme tiredness. I don't have anything like that. So it isn't about
Mhm.
exactly that, not even then going and just eating a whole lot of crap, because that's obviously going to be counterproductive.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually one thing I want to mention before I forget is going back to the topic of meat.
Mm.
This is one thing that I actually learned myself through this whole process. When I was autoimmune protocol or AIP, I was having a bit of meat and a whole bunch of vegetables, and I realized I wasn't eating hardly enough protein that I should have been. And this is a really common thing I see, especially with women, is our serving sizes of protein can be pitiful sometimes. And what's really important, especially for autoimmunity, protein, the amino acids in protein are really important for immune system function. We need these amino acids for our immune system. And the thing is that plant-based proteins are they are the plants that contain the most amount of anti-nutrients. Because plant proteins usually come from things like seeds and beans, which contain the plant's DNA that they want to propagate. So they don't want you to eat it. So they're going to protect that as much as possible. So plant-based proteins tend to be the most aggravating for the immune system, especially when the immune system is highly reactive.
Mm. I'm so glad you said that, because it is definitely an issue. And what an amazing week where I have, I've got 4 women talking about meat,
Mhm.
and the benefits of it. And I think it's such, I don't know how it happened, if it's marketing or just this thing that women can't sit down to a steak. I mean, it's it's the best. It is the best. And I'd love you to share. So you've talked about why protein is important, but it is also
Mhm.
about the fact that, nutrients, and there are people talking about this more this week as well, but your take on what are the animal products that have contain the most nutrients?
Yeah. Um, Also, sorry, before I forget again, I'm not sure if you want me to mention this now in terms of because endometriosis and autoimmune, so many women with autoimmunity also have a tendency to have endometriosis. And I want to mention something for those who might be watching this with endometriosis, because there is this myth in the endometriosis community that you have to go vegetarian,
Mhm.
because there's this belief that there's estrogen in meat that can trigger endometriosis. So
Okay.
this belief was created in the 90s by a medical doctor named John Matthias, I believe. He started a bunch of research and he saw some correlation about meat and endometriosis symptoms. So he came to this conclusion that women who eat meat have worse cases of endometriosis. Now, here's the thing about endometriosis. Any hormonal aspect of it is secondary to the initial immune system dysfunction. So it is true that estrogen fuels endometriosis growth. However, what's actually happening is that the immune system is producing particular inflammatory cytokines that are actually activating the body to produce its own extra estrogen at the endometriosis site. The particular inflammatory cytokine is called prostaglandin E2 or PGE2. Now, what's really interesting about PGE2, prostaglandin E2 is also what, when we take things like NSAIDs like ibuprofen or Advil, we're actually blocking PGE2 production, right? That's what helps to stop inflammation along that particular pathway. Now, this
Mm.
is what's interesting is the precursor for PGE2 is arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid, we can control to a certain extent by our diet. So arachidonic acid, dietary wise, is produced when we eat too much omega-6 fatty acid compared to omega-3. We need to have a ratio of between 1 to 1 to 1 to 4 of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. Now we need both because we don't produce either omega-3 or omega-6. But the problem is, especially with our standard American diet, we're up to like 30 to 1 in terms of a ratio. All that excess omega-6 actually goes down a pathway that produces arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid goes down a pathway to produce prostaglandin E2, and prostaglandin E2, especially for women with endometriosis, stimulates estrogen growth, estrogen production, which stimulates endometriosis growth. And then there's another pathway in terms of another enzyme that activates arachidonic acid called PLA2, phospholipase A2. And phospholipase A2 is predominantly found in corn, wheat, and soy. And if you think about it, a lot of women with endometriosis, they'll go to soy as a protein alternative. And so they're actually upping the enzyme that's going to be producing arachidonic acid. And then all this excess omega-6 fatty acids, the source of that is highly processed things, highly processed sources of omega-6 fatty acids. So things like vegetable oils is the worst. And then we also have things like omega-6 fatty acids are found in nuts and seeds. And especially if we go down this path of eating a lot of almond flour, nut butter, almond butter, peanut butter, right? All of this produces a lot of excess omega-6 fatty acids. And all of that is going to produce more of all of the stuff I just mentioned. And it also produces more inflammation. So it's not good for anybody with any type of autoimmune disease.
I'm so glad you did mention that. And that is something, you know, particularly people when they go low carb keto, you know, it's almond everything. It is almond milk. It is almond flour. Thankfully, I've never liked almond milk. I thought it was disgusting. But I definitely got caught up in the baking. You know, I swapped everything. I mean, I've stopped all of that now. I don't, you know, I rarely bake as it is because steak is just so much easier. But but it is really, really good to understand that, you know, that high omega-6 count in almonds. And if you're drinking, you know, a lot of almond milk, you're eating a lot of nuts, you're having a lot of almond flour. Yeah, it's probably something that you need to be really aware of.
Yeah. And then, so you asked me about the types of meat. And so this segues into the fact that, say, for example, let's look at omega-6 and omega-3. So chicken, pork, and eggs actually contain some omega-6 fatty acids, not as much as, say, for example, in nuts and seeds, especially when you have the highly concentrated ground up forms, right, of vegetable oils and nuts and seeds. But they do contain some, and they contain significantly more than red meat or ruminant meat. So things like lamb and beef contain significantly less omega-6, and they contain more omega-3 than, say, for example, chicken and pork. Now, it's not to say to avoid chicken and pork altogether, because we can't produce our own omega-6. We need some, right? And the amount that's found in chicken and pork is going to be more along the lines of what we're looking for than highly concentrated forms in nuts and seeds and soy and corn and all of these things. But it's also important. There's so many people that feel like red meat is not good for them, and that's all they eat is chicken and pork. And that's not necessarily a great idea either, because it is so high in omega-6. The reason why it's high in omega-6 is because these animals are monogastric. They have one stomach and they eat grains, and then they take the grains that they're eating and they produce omega-6, right? Versus the ruminant animal, which is a ruminant. It has multiple stomachs. And what they're eating, especially, they're supposed to be eating grass. They're actually not supposed to eat any grains. And there's actually a difference in terms of omega-6 content in animals that are pasture raised on grass and those that are fed grains, right? Because what the animal eats affects the quality of their meat. That's why it's so important to find, animals, source your meat. I particularly find anyways, just if you can source your meat from ethically raised farms and you know what they're eating can be better than, say for example, industrially raised meat where they're just eating grain to fatten them up quickly.
So what about fish? Where does fish sit in
Yes.
the...
So fish is quite high in omega-3 fatty acids. So that's your best source for omega-3. The acronym for the fish that are highest in omega-3 fatty acid is SMASH. Salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. They're very oily fish, and that's where you're going to find your omega-3 fatty acids in that oil, right? And some people don't like fish, or they don't tolerate it, or they're allergic to it. And if that's the case, then lamb is your next best bet. It is, of the land animals, it's the highest in omega-3 fatty acids. It's not as high as fish, but they call it land salmon for the reason that it contains a good amount of omega-3 fatty acids.
Land salmon, I love it.
Yeah.
And
Right?
salmon's interesting because certainly here in Australia, all fresh salmon is farmed and fed grain. I can buy frozen wild caught, but it's not cheap.
Yeah.
But what's your view? Because everyone sort of tends to have a different view. Is it worth still buying farm salmon or avoiding it? Because obviously it's going to have because I think with ruminants, as you say, like even certainly here in Australia, even conventional are mostly grass. They're just finished off with grain. But I think because of that sort of stomach system, it is a little bit protective. But fish, maybe, I don't know. What's your view on fish? Salmon?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I used to live on the west coast of Canada, so I saw a lot of the controversy in terms of fish farms, and I personally try to avoid farmed fish. I do see there are a lot of incidences of diseases in farmed fish, which doesn't sound like it would be optimal for our health.
Yeah.
In that situation, for some people, if that's all you can afford, it can be better than nothing, right? Or you could look at maybe, say, for example, accessing smaller fish, right? Like the anchovies and the sardines and the herring, and that can give you good sources of omega-3 fatty acids, and they're going to be wild caught.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I think that's the thing. There's always going to be options, and it's really just saying, that was one thing I really sort of learned a lot, when I went this, because I think I was just like, oh, what, just meat? Oh, I can't just eat meat. But then I realized, oh, actually, yes, sardines. I grew to love sardines and oysters, and there is a whole lot of different stuff, and lamb is. We're so lucky with our lamb here, yet most of it gets exported, so it's so expensive. But I prefer to spend my money on meat, and I don't necessarily buy grass-fed for my family of 7. I definitely can't afford to do that all the time, but I still know that it's better. And
absolutely.
it's worth it. So, I think I always try and say, just buy what you can afford. Exactly what you've said, buy what you can afford. And I'd love to turn the conversation inward now.
Yes, absolutely.
Even though, food we're talking in, but let's talk about the other layers and what you see are the themes, and what you can share to help people who are interested in looking in this direction.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm talking about a lot right now on social media is the fact that a lot of, say, for example, a lot of what's happening in terms of our stress and our behaviors and our actions and what is really actually affecting us underneath the surface is what I call our social conditioning. So our experiences growing up, especially in our first 7 years of life, right? So especially what our caregivers, our parents, for example, modeled to us, what they taught us, what we learned from our culture, what we learned from our society that surrounded us, that shapes our beliefs. It shapes our beliefs about us, about other people, about how the world works. And it's these beliefs, it's kind of like lenses on glasses, right? It colors the lenses that we see through. And so it's not necessarily the way things actually are, but they're just the way we believe they are because of the experiences that we had. And what can happen is that those beliefs about how everything works can affect how we feel about things. They can affect our emotions. And our emotions are what drives our behavior and our actions and our choices. And so oftentimes, especially as adults, we might look at our behaviors now and we think that we just need to change our behavior. Right. And this oftentimes, especially like when we look at people wanting to like change, especially with, say, for example, emotional eating or stress eating, for example, right? We just think, well, we just have to change our behavior. But there's so many layers underneath. Our emotions are what are driving our behavior, but there's another layer underneath that is that it's our belief system that's impacting our emotions, right? So it's not just trying to change your behavior isn't going to do much in terms of sustainable change. Addressing our emotions can make it a little bit more, but it's really actually diving underneath the surface and addressing all of those beliefs that have colored your lenses in terms of how you see the world, and do what I call social unconditioning. And uncondition yourself from the things that aren't actually your own personal truth, right? All those like expectations put on you from others of how you should do things, what people think you should do, what you think that you should do in order to meet other people's expectations, right? And all those beliefs that were set up, and realize how much of that actually isn't you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's so many of us that are, because we are run by these beliefs, and this is the thing, is if we aren't aware, all of these beliefs, it's kind of like they're kind of in our subconscious, and we're not aware that they're actually running the show. And it's not actually us, it's just these social conditioned beliefs that we adopted. And so many of them kind of force us into a mold that's actually not best for us. It's kind of like trying to fit ourselves in a pair of pants that are 4 sizes too small.
Which we've all done.
Right? It doesn't feel very good, does it? Now, imagine living your life every day, trying to walk around and sit down and function in a pair of pants that are 4 sizes too small. That's the pressure that's going on in your nervous system. Right? All that pressure of you trying to be someone that you're not, trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to, do all these things to kind of, because, well, this is the way that the world works, because this is the way I think that, other people are like, this is, I have to do it this way because I think this of other people, or I think this about myself.
Yeah.
And the reality
that
is
was huge with me. I think I have to do it this way so I can be loved. That was, yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is so many of our beliefs are shaped by our developmental needs. And there's 2 main developmental needs in our first 7 years of life that drive so many of our beliefs and behaviors and actions. And that is the need to feel safe and the need to feel accepted. Because that's survival, right? Especially if you think about thousands of years ago when we were in the tribe, we needed to feel like we were accepted and part of the tribe, right? In order to feel safe and secure, in order to survive.
Yeah.
And that really drives a lot of our beliefs. And especially as children, we can't really make sense of what's actually happening because unfortunately, there's a lot of generational passing down of mismatched beliefs.
Mm,
And a
mm.
lot of these beliefs are then colored by a lot of people having maybe some unresolved stuff within them or unhealed wounds within them. And they pass on those beliefs, right, to their children. And then us as young people, we don't have, the logic to kind of make sense of it, and we take it as face value. And then we just assume that then, especially if we're getting messages like if our caregiver is emotionally unpredictable or acting in a certain way, we don't automatically assume that there's something wrong with them or that maybe they've got some unhealed issue that they haven't yet worked through. We automatically assume that it means that there's something wrong with us. We caused it. It's our fault that our caregiver is acting this way.
Mm.
And that sets up beliefs about us. There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough, right? These are huge beliefs and they're so common. And these are the beliefs that if we carry forward with them and don't realize that they're not actually true, they put a lot of pressure on the nervous system because we're constantly thinking that there's something wrong with us.
They're running the show.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so part of the healing process, part of it is social unconditioning and understanding what beliefs are not actually yours. But then healing your relationship with you.
Mm.
Learning to fully accept, love, and trust yourself. Right? And when you do, everything else falls into place.
It does. And I can feel myself starting to tear up here, so I hope I don't cry. It does, absolutely. It is. It's just a journey that we said in the start. It is magical, and it can look very, very scary to look and step in that direction, but the payoffs are enormous, and the love that you can see in your life where once there was conditions
Mm-hmm.
just not there anymore, certainly if for me. And if you're sitting there listening to this and crying too, or resonating with any of it, I think what I love about Michelle and the work she does is that we don't have to let it be that way anymore.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We don't have to let it run the show. That's how I see it. It felt like I didn't even know that it was running my show. And even though I was, had done a lot of work, for want of a better word, but could see a lot about how we worked as human beings and was able to show others, as exactly as you said at the start, it's very difficult sometimes to see it in yourself. And what you did was really show me stuff I had no awareness of. I had no awareness. It just sort of, I just thought that's how it was. So that's the potential of the work that you do. And it is amazing. So what else would you like to share around that?
Yeah. So, one really important piece of the puzzle in terms of healing your relationship with you is developing compassion for yourself. Right? And understanding that everything that you've done in your life was out of survival, right? Especially all those things, because we have a tendency as humans, especially through our social conditioning, to feel guilt or shame or embarrassment or frustration for the things that we've done in our lives. But really, all of these things that we feel ashamed about, all of them we did because that's what we thought that we needed to do to survive, to accomplish either feeling safe or accepted in some way. All of it, right? Especially things like emotional eating, or, putting people first and, neglecting our own needs, all of it.
Yeah.
It's all because we were trying to feel safe, secure, or comfortable or accepted in some way. And if you can develop compassion for that instead of trying to shame yourself out into trying to change, but instead say, okay, I get it now. My body is wise. My mind is wise. I was trying to survive and I have made it to today. Wow. Okay. Right. And then say, okay, I can see what I was trying to do, but maybe this isn't serving me anymore. So maybe we can look at some better way to do this going forward. Right.
Mm.
And that's what creates positive change, instead of trying to shame ourselves into doing it better, or critiquing ourselves into doing it better. Right. Or if I can just be more perfect. Right.
If only. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And I think it's important to have that context around, that it is a journey, and that,
Mhm.
I I think I see people getting caught up in, oh, but why don't I see it? Or why doesn't, I want it to look like this now? And it's like, well, you have to trust the process and
Mhm.
go through the process. And, like I look at this beautiful unlayering back to home, back to the true essence of who we are. And I'm here, and I know that I'm just going to keep, there's just more and more layers
Mhm.
that I'm going to see. But where we are now is where we're meant to be, and there's nothing wrong with where we are now, but just there's always more to see. And yes, really deeply understanding, exactly as you said, that we're always doing the best we can with what we see, and with what we're given. I mean, that's how humans
Mhm.
are wired. But we can see beyond all those to,
Yeah.
yeah. And I truly believe, exactly as you said, that is the key to transformation. Anything, whether we have people, whether it's autoimmune or just anything,
Mhm.
if we, that's the key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The other thing I wanted to mention as well, actually, is that so often our symptoms are messages that our body is trying to give us that something isn't aligned for us. Right? Especially those symptoms that don't seem to resolve, those symptoms that the laboratory tests are saying, well, everything seems fine. Why do you have this symptom? Right? So often it's our body is always giving us messages, and it starts with whispers. If you can listen to the whisper, that's the best way. But we oftentimes ignore them, or we don't understand how to translate the message. And so, more often than not, these symptoms, no matter what it is, if it's pain, if it's digestive issues, if it's skin issues, there's so many different symptoms. And so often there is a sign, it's a message that something isn't working for you. Now, it could be that maybe you're eating a food that's not working for your body. That would be the most obvious. But, especially for the people who've done all the elimination and they're fully carnivore and they still got symptoms, then it's important to look deeper. And so often, a lot of these symptoms are maybe we're holding on to stressors that aren't ours. We're pushing ourselves beyond our emotional limits. We're maybe forcing ourselves to do things that we don't necessarily enjoy. Maybe we're stuck in a career that we really actually hate, right? Maybe we're doing things that we resent doing, but we think that we should be doing them because of social conditioning, right? And when we're doing these things, we're trying to fit these pants on that are 4 sizes too small. And our body is trying to yell at us and say, hey, this isn't working for us. Can we please change? Right?
Mm.
And once you start to connect with your relationship with yourself and develop compassion for yourself, there's this ability to start to be able to hear those messages and listen to them and understand what those messages are trying to say. And it's kind of like what I call calibrating your inner compass, right? because you have all the answers within you if you're just willing to listen to what your inside is trying to say, because oftentimes we don't trust it because we've been socially conditioned not to. Right? And when you do, when you start to hear the messages, then you start to get the certainty of like, yeah, you know what? This option isn't working for me. Maybe I need to change it or adjust it. Or what I think here isn't working for me. Maybe I need to change or adjust that. Right? And you start to get a calling in terms of your compass. You calibrate your true north and you get a sense of what direction is going to help you feel your best. If that makes sense.
Completely makes sense. Yeah. Especially because I've been on the path with you, and once you live it, it's like in a way it's like childbirth. It's like saying to someone who's never had a baby. So I try to explain the process. You just can't. It's almost like
you have to go through it.
Yeah. But this is to, and it is like a rebirth. It truly is like a rebirth. And
absolutely.
That's the message I love people to, I'd love people to understand, is that we can have as many rebirths as we want in our life, and we're never set in a mold, but that's got to come from the desire and the want from us. It can't come from anybody else outside us. It has to come from within us.
Absolutely. That is so true, right? And it's that desire that, I mean, it's going to motivate you. If you don't have the desire, you're going to be like, well, why am I going to do this? And this is where, I talk about 4 stages of healing, and we go along this path, especially when you've fallen ill with an autoimmune disease or a metabolic disease, or right. And stage 1 is where we often enter this path, and we often can feel like a victim of our circumstance. Right? Why me? Why is this happening to me? And we can be looking then for a solution outside of ourselves, someone to fix us, right? We think that we're broken and that we need fixing. And oftentimes this is where we'll go to the medical system to look for a pill, to look for a treatment, to look for a medication to fix our situation. Unfortunately, especially in the medical system, it's more about suppressing symptoms than rather actually getting to the root of the imbalance. Yeah. And some people will stay stuck here, but really, in order to really actually heal, you need to keep progressing through the stages. And stage 2 is where we start to discover that adjusting our external inputs can help us feel better. And this is where we realize that dietary changes can make a huge difference, right? A lot of people might start at the beginning of the spectrum and realize, well, maybe if I cut back on sugar, that's going to make me feel better. Right. And we might go incrementally through different steps of maybe changing certain things, and many people go all the way to meat only carnivore, right, as part of the spectrum in stage 2. And for some people, they think they get to the stage 2, especially in the carnivore community, and they think, well, then that's all I need. Right. That's all I needed was to change my diet. Now I'm good. I'm healed. Right. But they don't realize that there's 2 more stages. And there's so much more gold to unlock in those stages, and so much better results than they can get than they're already getting, even if they feel fabulous. And that's where going into stage 3 and realizing that if you can heal your nervous system and your internal emotional terrain, then you can get even better control over your body physiology. Right? Through supporting your nervous system. And your nervous system is what controls all of the other, physiological systems in your body. Right? And then going through the emotional healing through what we've talked about, right? So getting right down to the beliefs, do the social unconditioning, heal your relationship with yourself. And also discovering purpose is kind of another step that I guide people through in terms of emotional healing. Studies actually show that purpose helps improve chronic illness healing, autoimmune healing, and it improves your ability to deal with stress when you have a strong sense of purpose. And so that's part of healing your relationship with yourself, is actually discovering your purpose and stepping into it. And that just creates magic. Right?
Yeah.
And then stage 4 is when you realize that when I start by healing myself and I have healed my internal emotional terrain, then I can start to impact my external environment through having healed myself. And so I can impact the situations that I'm in. I can help improve the quality of the relationships that I'm in. Right? And when that happens, when you start to impact and positively impact your relationships, then they go and positively impact their relationships. And it flutters out like a butterfly or a ripple effect. And this is how we can heal the world.
And just like magic, bing, that beautiful noise. What great timing.
I forgot to put my phone on silent.
But it is so true, because, it's so easy to see that we have to heal everything outside of us for us to heal within, but it just doesn't work that way. And we can't not impact our relationships when we are healing within. And yeah, I just think they're beautiful, those steps. There's so many beautiful layers to that. And there's so much hope in that. So much hope.
Yes. That's so important as well, as to have hope. Right? Actually, studies show that individuals who don't have hope respond less positively to any treatment given.
Yeah.
And so that's, our mind is so important in your health. It's not just about the external inputs. While it's important what you eat, right, to make sure that you're making good choices for your biochemistry, it's only a piece of the puzzle. And really, the secret to true next level healing is to find and discover your own inner healer. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love this conversation. I could talk to you about this all day. It's been so insightful, so much wisdom, so much hope, so much magic. I can't thank you enough. I think it'd be lovely if you wanted to just sort of wrap it up with, maybe, some, where could people go to, if they've been inspired to learn a little bit more and they want to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
What would you recommend?
Yeah. So
coming to see you, obviously.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, the first step might be, I'm most on social media. I'm most active on Instagram. So finding me at Well Balance ND, ND like Naturopathic Doctor, or you can find me Michelle Dowker. And so you can find me on Instagram there. I like to post lots of things about all the stuff that I've been talking about. So it helps you to kind of integrate everything that I've mentioned here today. And then you can go to my profile link there. I've got lots of different options. You can meet me. I've got a free video. Currently, it is a little bit of a deeper dive into those 4 stages of healing. So you can learn more about that, and also a little bit more deeper dive into understanding what emotional healing looks like. And also there's information there on how to work with me one-on-one if you're looking for your own personal emotional transformation journey. You've tried all the diets, you've tried all the supplements, you know that emotional healing is the piece of your puzzle, but you are struggling to figure it out on your own, and you're looking for somebody to guide you to your own inner paradigm shift so that you can get the results that we've been talking about today. I'd love to hear from you. My DM is always open. You can email me and we can chat about it to see if you're fit. And I love hearing DMs from people who maybe got insights from this presentation and my other things that I post. I just love to hear when people get insights from what I talk about and it's helped them along their life. So.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, you are such a gift to the world. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I'm so grateful for Instagram, because that's how we connected, and there was a reason we connected. And yeah, just thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you, Michelle.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for having me, Tracy.
You're very welcome.